Yeah, so hi everyone, and welcome to our series where we interview computer science faculty about their job search and interview experience to help future faculty candidates better prepare for their job search. And today we are here with Jürgen Zito, who has started as a tenure track assistant professor at TU Wien, the Technical University of Vienna, in February 2020. Jürgen's main research interests are broadly in understanding how people use programming languages and building tools to help them achieve their goals. And with that, it's great to have you here, Jürgen.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. Great series, and gladly I can be part of it.
Perhaps can you first shortly introduce yourself?
Sure. So, as you said earlier, my name is Jürgen Zito. I'm originally from Vienna, Austria, and this is also where I did my undergrad. I did my undergrad here at TU Wien, and after that, I did my PhD at the University of Zurich in Switzerland with Harald Garland and Philipp Leitner. And after that, I did about 2-year postdoc at MIT in the US, and then came back to Vienna, back to the roots, and started a tenure track position back here in Vienna at the same school I did my undergrad. So that's an interesting experience for sure.
And what about your research?
I work in software engineering and programming languages. I'm mostly interested to understand how people build large computational structures of any kind. This can be programs that build web applications or even embedded systems, up to machine learning pipelines or other sort of data sciencey things, where people use different tools to achieve their goals. One is the IDE, that is the main thing for software engineers. The other one can be Jupyter notebooks for data scientists, for instance. And I'm trying to understand how people use these tools, and then through that understanding of their challenges and struggles, we try to come up with interventions in the form of tools or other sorts of analyses or systems to help them do what they want to do. And I keep this purposely broad because I do have a little bit of a problem of focusing on one particular thing. I'm interested in a lot of different things, but I think it has this thread in common where I just want to help people program in a way that they make less errors, they have less friction in what they want to program, and eventually, they get to turn their ideas into computation. So that's my overall goal, I would say.
And you already mentioned now that you have quite a lot of experience at TU Vienna, both as a student and now as an assistant professor. So, first of all, how does TU Wien fit into the landscape, in the academic landscape in Vienna? Because there is at least one other university, right? So what's the relationship to the University of Vienna?
Right. So if one is familiar with the, I would say, Germanic academic system, there are these, broader, larger universities. That's the University of Vienna, where you can study pretty much anything that your heart desires. You have everything from anthropology to psychology, computer science, mathematics, right? And then you have these technical universities, Technische Universitäten, and the one that I'm currently a faculty at is TU Wien, the Technical University of Vienna, where the focus is engineering and technology. And similar systems exist in Germany and Switzerland, and I think in the Netherlands I've heard this sort of system also, right? You have the TUs there also, and the main difference is really what is being offered, right? What is being offered in terms of undergrad and master studies, but also where the research is. And I would say the University of Vienna does not have certain kinds of studies, so they don't have mechanical engineering, for instance, right? So that's something you can only study at TU Wien. But what you do have in both departments is, let's say, math, physics, and computer science. And the way that these things differ in both the undergraduate and graduate education and research is, I think, just a focus on the engineering aspects, which we have, and then potentially one could say in the more fundamental aspects at the University of Vienna. But that's not entirely true. I think it's just what sort of faculty you have hired over the years. And then in terms of curriculum, at least in computer science, there's not a lot of difference. I think the difference there is that we have a much larger faculty. We have around 70 professors in our faculty right now, whereas University of Vienna has, I would say, approximately 20, and just a variety of offerings that you have for both undergrads and graduate students is much broader. in our sense. I think it's very similar to the difference between ETH and University of Zurich, for instance.
And besides technical universities, I mean, in Austria, there is also this special kind of University of Applied Sciences or Fachhochschulen.
Right.
So can you tell us what this is?
I can try, and maybe you can also help me because you also know that system, being from Austria yourself. The University of Applied Sciences, from my perspective, is just a very different way of education because the curriculum that you enter is much more rigid, and the way that you are able to do your undergrad is, I would say, it's more similar to what I've been accustomed at school than I was accustomed at the universities that I've seen and I've attended, where you have a very fixed timetable and you have to be there from 9 to 3, 9 to 4, whatever the timetable tells you, and there's very little choice what you can do. The nice thing about that structure is that you do have a very concrete structure. You know what you're expecting, and there's not there's not a lot of choice, and people may say that this is a disadvantage at some point. Some people may say this is exactly what they want. So I think it's really just what you want to have in terms of an education. The other difference is that they usually don't do research, so they're not PhD granting institutions, but there are exceptions to that. I know University of Applied Science professors, professors that do research, but they are not PhD granting institutions. So usually you do an undergrad, you can do a master's, and then you're done there. But I would say in education, from an education perspective, the main difference is that you can't really, you're stuck with the thing that you want to study, but the main advantage there is that usually you're also done within the time, where at other Austrian universities, the average time to do your undergrad is much higher, right? So I think the average time to do a computer science undergrad for us is, I think it was 6 or 6 years. I'm not sure. Yeah, it's a bit longer, but that that has other social factors where people have to usually work while they do their undergrad and stuff like that. But at the University of Applied Science, that's a full-time program, right? There's no choice other than that, and you have to finish in 3 years.
Understand. Okay.
Yeah, or maybe back to you. So what do you think is the main difference?
I couldn't have explained it better.
Okay, good.
so thanks for that.
Okay.
And with respect to communication and teaching language, is everything in German, or are also some classes, for example, held in English?
So the class that I am teaching currently, like the largest class I'm teaching, is supposed to be in German because it's in the undergraduate curriculum. So usually if the undergraduate curriculum is not specifically designed to be in English, it has to be in German. What I do is I usually ask people within the class whether there's someone who is more comfortable with English rather than German. And usually there's at least a handful or often more, because it is a very international city, and we have exchange students and so on and so forth. So far I've only been teaching in English, although I wouldn't have to. But and honestly, so far no one ever complained that I taught in English, so it has been fine so far.
And what's the teaching load for new assistant professors?
That's interestingly at TOV a bit difficult to say, because because the way that these legacy systems calculate how much you have to teach. So my contract says I have to teach 4 hours a semester. Like, so it's a system called Semesterwochenstunden. I don't think there's a clear translation in English. Just imagine that classes you teach take up certain hours a week. But the way that you allocate these hours and the way that through your contract type that is calculated is just very difficult. So you just have an agreement with the Dean of Studies of what you should teach, and then you're fine, right? That's how it currently works. But there's some revision to that system that is being done in the next couple of years. What I can say maybe is comparable to other schools that I talk to is for the tenure track, you have about, I would say, 1 undergrad class, 1 master's class that you should teach, and maybe 1 to 2 seminars a year. So I would say 1 larger class semester is approximately what people expect of you. You do have a teaching release for the first semester, although I had an exception to that, but I'll maybe come to that later.
And you already mentioned tenure track. So do professor positions in Austria typically use this kind of tenure track system, or is this an exception for TU Wien? Not sure if you know.
I know a little bit because I've just been looking at the market a little bit, what's been going on, and I've seen more and more institutions in Austria adopt the tenure track system, but it is definitely new. Like even at TU Vienna, this has been around only, I would say, the last maybe 10 years max, 8 to 10 years. So the previous dean introduced the system on the recommendation on the International Advisory Board of the faculty, and because they said, hey, if you want to compete with everything that's going on in terms of professors and people who want to work for you, maybe, then you should implement the tenure track. And they did that. And, I think currently we have about 8 tenure track professors. And the whole lifetime of tenure track professors, we had maybe a dozen, right? So 12, 13. Mm-hmm. So it's a very young system. And the tenure track is also a bit different than it is in the US system. Instead of having a 6-year tenure track, you have a 4-year tenure track. So that's a bit different. And I guess tenure tracks do differ between universities in the US and Canada and the UK also. Or wait, in the UK, there's no tenure track, right?
Right, they have this lecturer kind of
right,
more or less permanent positions.
Right, they have this 3-year probation sort of system, right. I think, but yeah, exactly, yeah. No, the tenure track here is 4 years, and there's a 10-year contract with a few vague things that you need to do, and I think those are similar to everywhere. It's do good teaching and do great research and get in the grants and do academic service, both at the faculty and outside. And it's, I would say, vague on purpose because they want to have a good mix of all these things. And if you're better at getting grants, it's okay if you haven't published that many papers. Although one very strict requirement is your evaluation package in the end should contain 5 of your top papers. Mm-hmm. So that is the only hard requirement that I remember. And the others are just merely suggestions. Although one suggestion is get a teaching award. So,
Okay.
Yeah.
And you already got yours for it?
I did get mine, yes. So okay. I don't have to care about teaching anymore. No, I'm joking, obviously. I deeply care about teaching, but I did get a teaching award last year, yes.
Okay, that's nice.
Yeah.
And after these 4 years, you directly promote that to an associate professor, or?
Yeah, exactly, right. So maybe I'll say one more thing. The tenure track system works in a way that every year you have, you provide the dean with a report of saying, hey, this is what my progress was this year. And then you have a quick conversation with the dean and they tell you, oh yeah, you're on track. Or, hey, you should work on your papers or you should work on your teaching, right? So they give you, I would say, informal feedback, which I just had a couple of weeks ago, and it was very informal and nice. So that was cool. And in the second year of your tenure track, so halfway through, you have to submit your first, what's it called? Tenure package. So sort of a midway through tenure package where you have to, I think, provide 3 papers that you have published in the first 2 years and just what you've done, basically, right? And you get, I think, reviews from, I think it was 2 or 3 external reviewers already. But that has no bearing on the course of your tenure track. That's just a mid-cycle feedback, if you will. And based on that feedback, you can improve in certain areas that these external reviewers have identified. And then after 3.5 years, basically, or maybe you can push it to 4 years, you have to submit your tenure package, which is definitely telling people how great you are and how great you've been the last 4 years and how good your students have done. And then hopefully you get tenure, and with tenure, you get to become associate professor. And
there is also one term that you can sometimes hear, habilitation. Mm-hmm. Is this something that is part of this more legacy kind of system?
I think habilitation is still important in certain fields in computer science, and probably you can ask a couple different professors, you'll get different answers. But at least at our faculty, habilitation is not a requirement anymore to get tenure. And honestly, I've seen openings for full professors at different universities, even in Germany and Switzerland, and it doesn't say habilitation required anymore. It says habilitation or equivalent, and equivalent, parentheses, being an associate professor. So I think getting tenure is somehow being equated with having habilitation. Should I say a few words of what habilitation is?
Right, that would have been a follow-up question.
Okay, yeah. So for those of you who don't know what habilitation is, it's a system that has been around for a while. It's the highest degree you can get from a university in, I think it's mostly the German-speaking area, although I think the French may also have it, right? Basically it's your second. I usually call it my second PhD thesis. So after your PhD, you gather another couple papers that you've published, like the best papers you've published in the next, I don't know how many years usually are in between those things, a couple of years. And those become your habilitation thesis. And what they enable you to do is formally to teach at the university. So if I get my habilitation from TU Wien, from the Technical University of Vienna, I'm officially, and formally enabled to teach at the university, and that's the highest level of education I can reach. And usually that habilitation has been the prerequisite of becoming a professor in the past. But since the tenure track has been introduced as a career system, this habilitation has become obsolete with respect to becoming a professor. That's all I know. Either if you want to know more, I think Wikipedia has the answers.
Sounds good. Yeah, one thing I also wanted to talk about is like how formal the communication is when talking to, let's say, Austrian professors, or in general as a faculty candidate in the Austrian academic job interviewing process.
So maybe the implicit underlying question here or statement here also is usually Austrians are known to be more formal, and whether, right?
Right, yes.
So it was all very relaxed. So I'm trying to think of some point in the process where we'd have to be very formal to each other, and I think we didn't have to. It was always the salutation was always formal, like per Sie. There was no per du, right? Mm-hmm. But otherwise, it was a very informal atmosphere, I would say. I was also surprised.
Were you also in contact with professors that you didn't previously know? I assume so, right?
Yeah. In the interview process, in different stages, I did talk to professors that I didn't know previously, and I never had classes with, and that I didn't know and they didn't know me. So it was very similar to just applying to any university. And it's a large school, so it's the computer science department. It's in Vienna, it's the largest in Austria, and I think one of the largest in Europe. So usually, if a professor is not your advisor for some things, you don't usually know them. It's a very impersonal system, unfortunately, but that's how it is. So I didn't know the professors, and they didn't really know me.
I see. Okay.
Yeah.
Like, are the application deadlines at Austrian universities typically aligned with the US ones, or are they like at different times?
I think they're not usually aligned. It really depends. So there's an internal process of how positions are created, like tenure track positions, and they usually are not aligned with the US calendar, basically, for positions. In my case, I think the position was posted in November, which is sort of in line with the US system. So I was lucky there, right? So I was able to apply when I was applying to other positions also.
One last question about the Austrian academic system. How does funding typically work? How are students funded, and how can you obtain external funding?
Yeah, that's a good question. So there are two kinds of funding for anything, but especially students. You have the global budget, is what it's called. That's a budget that as a public university, you receive basically through taxpayer money, and it goes through the university and the faculty down to the groups, and then you get a share of the pot basically, and based on that you can fund infrastructure and students and all sorts of other things. And as a tenure track professor, it depends how you negotiate, whether you can get a PhD position, for instance, that you can fund through this global budget. And in my startup package, I had one PhD student that I was able to fund through that. The other means that you have are the National Science Foundation of Austria. It's called the FWF. I think for basic research, that is the largest funding possibility. It's like the NSF in the US. It's like the SNF in Switzerland, the DFG in Germany. It's the one place where basic research and basic science is being funded. And the other major funding opportunity is the FFG in Austria, the Forschungsförderungsgesellschaft, which funds applied research programs together with companies. So if you have an industrial collaboration and there are different programs you can apply to receive funding for let's say PhD students and postdocs in conjunction with collaborating with a company. And then there are a handful more that I'm not sure if it's interesting to go through them, but there's certainly a lot of research funding in Austria, and competition exists, and I've yet to win a grant from these institutions, but I hope I'll get there. Let's put it that way.
Okay, fingers crossed.
Thanks.
Yeah, and one thing I also wanted to mention is you were a research affiliate at MIT still until earlier this year. Mm-hmm. After you accepted a position, I think, and started it. So can you also explain how that worked? Right.
So the research affiliate positions at MIT specifically, and I think you may have them at other universities, are about continuing a formal relationship with an institution. And in my case, that was really helpful because I was still working with students back at MIT, and I was still, collaborating, with the infrastructure and just the data that was still there. And the research affiliate position that I still had made that easier, that relationship easier. And also, that wasn't the case last year, but I would have been able to just go to Boston and still have an office there, right? That was the initial plan, but through the situation that we found ourselves in last year through the global pandemic, that wasn't the case, right? Everyone was back home. And the way that it formally worked for my new employment basically is that MIT and TU Wien had to share IP for anything that was potentially marketable. So if I were to file a patent at that time, for instance, then it would be both MIT and TU Vienna on that patent. If I have any sort of other, let's say, invention or that we could lay claim to some intellectual property, then there was a clear agreement that both of those institutions have part in it. So that was the major, I would say, agreement that both these universities had to come to terms with. But MIT knows about all this, so they have a ready forum, and just our dean was just able to sign it, and that was it.
So it didn't cause any major headaches to get this through?
No, not really. You just need a sponsor from the MIT side. So I continue to be part of the group of Martin Reinhardt at MIT CSAIL, and I think it was a win-win for both both sides, because I was still able to deeply collaborate with people in the group, and we got papers out, and we were able to share infrastructure. And from the TU Vienna side, I think it was good to have that connection with a world-class institution. So I think no one lost in this case.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, sounds great that it worked out like this.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, and you have been now an assistant professor for a while. So what were
year and a half? I wouldn't say for a while. I'm still figuring it out. Yeah.
I guess longer than most people watching the video. So you're already a few steps ahead.
Right.
Yeah, and what were the initial challenges that you have faced so far?
Yeah. Okay. I have some things to say here. I'm trying to put them in words that don't scare anyone. No, I think the transition from student and then postdoc and then assistant professor, especially from postdoc to assistant professor, the difference is huge in how many things you have to do at once. Just so much more overhead in terms of how many meetings you have to have. You're suddenly in way more service positions than you've been before. You suddenly have a lot of students to advise. You're in this in this internal group at the faculty that deals with I don't know, something about the faculty. You are in this PC, and just the overall volume of work and just the context switches you need to do is something that took me by surprise the first couple months. Oh yeah, obviously the teaching, like I started teaching right away, like in my first semester, and that was a lot of work, especially if you have to switch your whatever teaching strategy you have. Switching that to being only online was a bit of a pain. Mm-hmm. So, but yeah, what overwhelmed me the most was just the sheer context switching I needed to do every day, which after now a year and a half, I've come to terms with. This is just something that's going to happen. You're just going to have a bunch of stuff to do. Just make sure to have good to-do lists. And now I understand why there are 300 to-do list apps, because everyone has different needs for how they organize their thoughts and tasks. And the other thing is, I think I learned to say no a lot more, because as a newly minted tenure tracker, people also sort of know that you do need certain stuff that you want to put on your CV, for instance, or you want to have a certain experience. But at some point, you have to realize that you cannot do everything. Mm-hmm. And I've been I would say for a solid couple of months now, I've been starting to say no to certain things, and surprise, nothing bad happens. It's been fine. Although still room to grow. I have to say no to even more things.
Glad that you said yes to the interviewing series.
I think I'm very glad to be doing this, but I'm very glad that I did not accept that 20th journal review this year, for instance. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think the amount of reviewing that you're asked to do is pretty insane. But that's just the system right now. I think there's just so many people submitting papers and not enough people willing to review papers. But at some point you have to just manage what you can do. And reviewing, unfortunately, is just my least favorite activity in all the research. So I've been starting to prioritize saying no to certain things, especially like, let's say, journal reviews that I'm not an expert on. Like if I'm an expert on a topic, I gladly read the paper, but because the current influx of papers is very large, people send you review requests for topics that you have no idea of. And that is just very stressful for me. So I've been saying no to those.
Yeah, that's relatable.
Yeah. Sorry for ranting. The end of rant.
No, it was very insightful. Yeah, about teaching, what I wanted to follow up on is, I guess since you explained how the teaching system works, is that you also don't have any kind of formal teaching relief that you typically get as part of the offer package, right?
It's an informal part of the offer, but it exists. So usually the first semester you start, you have a teaching relief, get settled, start your group, hire students, right? So that is usually your first semester. The reason I had to postpone my teaching relief to a semester later was that the class I was supposed to be teaching was the first semester I started. And the reason I couldn't get the teaching relief was that I also deferred my offer. So I was supposed to start in the winter of 2019, or fall 2019. And because I still had, stuff going on in my postdoc and my partner still needed to wrap things up at her work in Boston, we decided to move for the spring semester. And, and then the understanding with the dean was that it's okay for me to come to the spring, but I do need to teach that class because the class is mandatory for some students, and it hadn't been offered for over a year. So, someone needs to teach that class, and it was me at the time.
Okay.
So I got my teaching relief the semester after.
And was this also something easy to do to get this later starting date?
Yeah. I mean, the dean wasn't super happy because she wanted people to start right away and, to enrich the faculty. And I think she's also had experience with people who defer that then, don't take the offer eventually. So that's kind of a bad move, but people do that. But I think in my case, like the one semester is usually fine. 1 year can be a bit trickier. It really depends on, I guess, also what the understanding is of what classes you're teaching. Like another tenure tracker that started approximately with me, he had to teach a master's class. And for that class, it wasn't that important if, it hasn't been taught in over a year because it wasn't mandatory. But in my case, I think she was happy that it was only 1 semester. But it's definitely something that you can talk about. I think that's starting date becomes part of the whole negotiation space that you're in, for sure.
And with students, how did you find your first graduate students or student?
Through pure luck. The first, grad student I'm working with is Michael Schroeder, and he was a TA with me back in the day. But at the time I started my PhD, he decided to do some freelancing and then a startup. But he was always really interested in research, and every time I was back in Vienna, we met for a beer somewhere and we talked about research. And interestingly, before I had my interview in Vienna, we had a drink together, and I jokingly said, well, if I get the position, you'll be my PhD student, my first PhD student, right? And we were all laughing it up back then. And then when I eventually got the offer and it was clear that I needed to hire a PhD student, I did, sort of call him and say, hey, remember we talked about this? And then we had, further conversation about this. And, it seemed like our interests and goals were aligned. So he started doing the PhD with me back then. We did open up the call to more people to see, who applies. And if, more people had applied, we did have sort of like a backup position for other people also. But eventually, he was the right candidate. And that's maybe different to other departments at TU Vienna and many other, I would say, European institutions that I know. You apply directly to the group that you want to be in instead of applying centrally to the department.
Right. Okay, I see.
Yeah, and the start dates are very arbitrary because you start. That's another thing. Being a research assistant as part of your PhD is totally disjunct from actually being a PhD student. So Michael started in winter 2019 to be a research assistant, but he only started to be a PhD student the semester after. So those things are mutually exclusive.
Yeah, I almost forgot to register as a PhD student when I did my PhD.
There you go, right? So this is a bit different now in TU Vienna. They formalized this a little bit. So it's not possible anymore to register for your PhD just a semester before you graduate. There is some formal process now involved. There's I think a PhD school. I think that's what they call it now.
I see. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. Now we chatted quite a bit about some more general points. So let's perhaps start chatting about the application and interviewing process. Mm-hmm. So first of all, can you give us a bit of an overview of your experience and of the hiring season?
Yes. I think the year I applied, which was 2018, 2019, was a really good hiring season. There were a lot of positions out there to apply to. My partner and I did have a hard constraint back then. We were more concerned with the location, that it fits for both her career and my career. And also with what we wanted out of life. And after living in the US for a couple of years, I think it was clear to both of us that we didn't want to live in the United States long term. So the US was off. The US positions were off the table, basically, which excluded a lot of openings, like most openings are in the US. Mm-hmm. when it comes to tenure track positions. So I applied to only really a handful of positions in Canada and Europe. Those were our, sort of target markets. So I think eventually I applied to 5 universities. I got invites from 3, and I got offers from 2. And I didn't go to the 3rd, actually. I didn't interview because I already accepted the position. So it was a very small round, but that was sort of intentional because I didn't actually want to go out that year. I've only been a postdoc for a year or so, and I thought, I want to stay at MIT for a bit longer. But the thing with your positions in Europe is that they don't come up very often. So when I saw that TU Vienna and the other school, TU Delft, that I was interested in, had openings, I thought, well, kind of now or never. Because if TU Vienna, for instance, fills their position that year, I probably won't have a chance again to apply for that position. So that was sheer luck, I would say, that it just happened that year. And since I didn't feel entirely ready, or I didn't feel my CV was padded up enough for applying to more positions, I said, I'll just go for those and I see how it goes. If I hate everything about it, I may have to think about switching careers and going into industry. Mm-hmm. And if it just doesn't go well, but I had a good experience, I would have just applied the next season also. But luckily, everything turned out well.
Okay, yeah, sounds good, and like a very good success rate also.
Yeah, it was nice, but I think it was also a function of really applying only to the positions where I truly saw myself being there, and I was very prepared to talk to this particular institution and department. I think that sort of helped.
Already as a very specific question related to preparation, did this also mean that you, for example, tailored some of your like application materials, for example, the cover letter or so, specifically for that institution, or did you not do that? I almost rewrote the cover letter from scratch for every institution. Okay.
Yeah. So, there were certainly bits that were very templatey that talk about only me, but I tried to integrate myself into the faculty. Like I wanted to show the people who read this in the committee how I see myself as part of that faculty. So I think that was something that I spent a lot of time on. I didn't change my CV. The CV stayed the same, right? I did change my research and teaching statement a little bit. So it mostly stayed the same, but I tried to insert references to the faculty and, the way I can collaborate with the faculty, the way that I see how I can contribute to the teaching portfolio, how I can contribute to the overall research that they already have at the faculty. So this is what I definitely changed. And that did take some time. Like, preparing application materials takes time, but then going through all of it and trying to put in the specific things that people want to hear, or just help the committee see how you see yourself within the faculty, that takes a lot of time also. So I would say for every university, like it took forever to put together the application materials. I don't even know how long it took. Mm-hmm. And then it took, I think, at least one day, like one full day to adapt it to each university. And did you also mention, for example, specific names of faculty members, classes, and so on? Or yes, I was very specific. Okay. Yeah, and that already took time. So if you need to know, but I think that's not an uninteresting exercise, right? You do want to see how you would fit into the faculty. Are you programming languages faculty number 7, and you need to those things have advantages and disadvantages in the faculty. If there's already an established body of knowledge within PL and you're adding to it, you can collaborate better maybe, but it also means that you have to on some level also compete, right? Because if you're faculty member number 7 in that topic, it may be difficult to stand out, right? So it's a bit of a scale here. But I thought it was always interesting to see also how much information you have on websites and how much information you can get to, the grad student that from conferences. And so I did also talk to other people from the faculty to get some more information. And as a general kind of question, so what advice can you give for future faculty candidates about preparing their application materials? Yeah, I think that that's a difficult question to answer because of survivorship bias. Like, and now that you made it, you think all the things you did, were the right things to do.
Mm.
So I'm not entirely sure what concrete advice I can give. What I personally thought helped me is do the research about the faculty and the department, and because that will also come in handy when you have the one-on-one interviews or the interviews with the dean. Invariably, questions will come up as how you see yourself in the faculty, and just knowing what the strengths of the departments are and how you can add to those strengths, I think is important. So I think that would be the only quite generic thing that I can say.
Yeah, makes sense.
Yeah.
How did it influence that you already were a student at TU Wien? Like, did this also help, for example, with preparing these materials that you could, let's say, relate your own experience in, for example, the teaching statement or so?
I didn't explicitly mention this in the teaching statement that through my perspective as a former student, I have these ideas, but it did help in preparation. Even though I hadn't been a student there for about 7 years or so, it's still basically, it gave me an easier way into knowing where the strengths are and where things can be improved. And so I sort of hit the nail on the head by saying, we can improve this, because I knew there was a let's say a contention point within the department. So I think that certainly helped from that perspective. From a research perspective, because the faculty is just so large, right? We have 70 professors. It's hard. And I still needed to do research. Like, even though I was a student there, I still needed to do research. Who was hired the last couple of years? Who can I collaborate with from all these people, right? So even though I think it helped, it didn't help as much as one may think.
Let's perhaps continue chatting about interviewing. Mm-hmm. And there's the first question: how did your visit at TU Wien look like?
Mm-hmm. So because I did a very typical North American visit, I can say that it's very different. So a typical, I would say, North American visit, and institutions that do similar interview structures and visit structures usually have half-hour or hour-long interviews with different faculty. You go out to lunch with different faculty. You give your talk at some point. You talk to students. So all of this at TU Wien was condensed into like a 3-hour slot. Exactly. I came in, I gave a talk in front of the committee and people who were interested in the talk. So it was the committee, and I would say like maybe 10 more people from the faculty, both students and professors. And then at some point after I gave my talk and I answered questions to like the general public, let's say, then I was only with the committee, and the committee together sort of grilled me in this group setting interview. Although it was all fine. It wasn't too bad, but compared to what I had, let's say in McGill in Canada, it was definitely condensed, right? So it was a lot of adrenaline at once, I would say. Mm-hmm. And after my talk with the commission, I also sat down with the former dean and the new dean, and there we were, very specific. Well, if we were to make you an offer tomorrow, what do you think this would look like? How would you build up your group, and so on and so forth? So what if we tell you that you have to teach this class? How will you prepare for it? And so I think the deans, like the former dean and the new dean, they asked the most specific questions then. And I think I got all the same questions that I had in at the Canadian University, but just very condensed. It was all in a course of 3 to 4 hours. And afterwards, we went out for coffee. So there was an informal part also.
Okay, that sounds like very Viennese kind of culture.
Exactly. And it was a bit funny, and I only realized this after. because I was walking through the city and I was walking towards the faculty. And then I see someone from the community that I know that has no business being in Vienna otherwise. So we saw each other, and then we realized, oh, we're both applying for the same position. So the interviews are on the same day usually, or in the course of 2 days. That's why it's so condensed.
That's interesting. Okay.
Yeah.
And was this visit preceded by a phone interview, or was this a direct invitation that you received?
It was a direct invitation, actually. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah, at McGill, I had a phone interview, and then I had back then a Skype call with 2 faculty and a student, and then there was an invitation. So I think the process was definitely, I would say, faster. And interestingly, I did not require the TU Vienna position did not require recommendation letters.
Ah, okay, that's also interesting.
Yeah,
so quite a lot of differences to what you know from US institutions or North American ones.
Absolutely, exactly. I was very surprised. I found out later that they don't trust recommendation letters because the people you ask for recommendation letters will say good things anyway, sort of, and they acquire external reviewers to write letters for the top, I think, 6 candidates.
Okay, that's interesting. Yeah. Did you ever see these letters? I assume no.
I did not. No, those are secret.
And during the interviews, did you receive any questions that were unexpected?
And one question by the former dean, because he was sort of on his way out, I guess, at Indiana. He said, "Where else are you applying?"
I see.
That was kind of funny because there was a member of the commissions that told me, "You don't have to answer that," you know. Yeah. And then I was fine with telling him that I applied to a handful of other institutions, and he looked very concerned. He thought he maybe thought that this was the only place I'm applying to, which is sort of ludicrous, right? I think the other members knew that wasn't the case.
That's interesting.
Yeah. From a content perspective, I did have 1 or 2 questions where the people in the audience didn't understand the topic, and I think you should be prepared to because the commission at least in Vienna, that was the case, and I think it was also the case at McGill, is set up not only by people in your field. Like at McGill, I had people from electrical engineering that listened to my talk. Mm-hmm. So even though your talk does have to go deep, right? Your technical talk, be prepared to explain your topic in a couple of minutes to someone who is an electrical engineer, for instance. I think that's something that I didn't anticipate, and it was a bit difficult for me to do, but it worked out eventually.
And one question, at any of the visits, did you receive any questions that made you feel uncomfortable?
Not really. I mean, there were certainly, I would say, edgier questions about, the two-body problem, I would say. Mm-hmm. Questions about just personal matters, right? But nothing unexpected. Like if you go through, guides by different people of what faculty ask you, right? Then those questions were all in there. Thus, they weren't uncomfortable, but there were certainly personal questions that I think the commission used to gauge whether you would actually come, right, or whether you were just practicing.
I see. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. We chatted now a bit about the interviewing process itself. So let's continue about hearing back from the institution and then also deciding.
Yeah. Yes.
Yeah. The first question here is like. What did you do when you received your first offer? How did you proceed?
So when I received the first offer, I didn't realize it was an offer. I thought it was an error. No, because the first offer I received was from TU Vienna, actually. And it wasn't an offer. It was just an email by HR saying, you start on Monday, basically. So I thought, oh, this must be a mistake. So I just emailed the dean saying, because the dean called me at some point, like on the phone, and said, "Hey, you're gonna get the offer letter from us, but just so you know, you got an offer. Congratulations." So that was nice. I'd say that I had a nice touch, right? Just like an informal FYI. And I was excited. I was like, oh, cool, first offer. And then I was waiting for the offer letter. And turns out that the Department of Computer Science, or the Faculty of Informatics in that case, they know where the tenure track is. But the HR department at TU Vienna, they're not used to those kinds of positions. So for them, a tenure track assistant professor is just a regular job that they put into their system, right? And that's why they were a bit too eager and sent out that email beforehand. And as it turned out, if you didn't negotiate with the dean, then you didn't get a starter package, and the offer was just a contract. The offer was a contract that says, this is how you make a month, this is how you have to teach, and have fun, basically. So I think given that the tenure track system is still very young at that institution, they just weren't accustomed to actually writing an offer letter, which with all these informations that you actually need. So luckily enough, like a week after that, I got an offer from McGill. So I knew what an actual offer letter looked like with all the information that you come to know, how much office space you get. This is your startup package in terms of money. This is how long you can use it, and so on and so forth. And then I told TU Vienna, all right, if I have this other offer, it's much better than just having a contract. We should maybe talk about the startup package. And they profusely apologized. They were like, we're so sorry. It's just that this is very new to us. And then I had two, I think, 4 or 5 hour conversations with the dean to negotiate a starter package, because it was just such a new concept. I think by now since I started, we hired, I think, 4 or 5 new tenure track positions. I think they had a better time.
I see.
because now, the new dean was primed that people actually need and want a startup package. Whereas I think the people that came before me, they were okay with just having the position. And the startup package was not a normal thing. So I think having a startup package as a tenure track professor is something that if you want your candidate to succeed, you need to have. And I think the TU Vienna and probably also other European institutions are starting to realize that. But it's not something as established as it is in North America.
I think it's an interesting time to join these experiences.
For sure.
And so the salary, is this fixed, or was this also something that was negotiable?
Yeah, that was the only thing that was not negotiable. I tried.
I see.
Yeah. So, and then I talked to other people also. The salary is basically only negotiable starting at the associate professor level, and also basically only if you have a counter offer. Yeah, I had a counter offer, and it was, that salary was higher, and I tried to negotiate it, but there was no chance.
Yeah, one question also, because you mentioned your wife before. So like, did the university provide any kind of help with your two-body situation, or?
No, they had no systems in place for that. They did refer us to, and what is it called? There's a funding body. I think it's even the FFG that I mentioned earlier, that offers spouse support for incoming academics. So if you're an incoming academic, this can even be a postdoc, then the FFG offers, I think, a 2,000 euro stipend for your spouse to get some sort of course or spend however they think they need, basically. But that was it.
Okay, I guess that doesn't last for too long.
No. So any sort of support for the two-body problem, I think that doesn't exist.
So I would say let's wrap up with a final question, namely, what kind of advice can you share with future faculty candidates?
The advice that I also got from my mentors when I talked to them about this, that I think helped me and still stuck with me is, know from the start what you actually want out of your job. Is location important? Is pedigree important? Is what is it that you want? And that helped me narrow down exactly what I needed and wanted, and that I think significantly decreased the stress levels that I have when applying, because I knew with every conversation that I had that it wasn't for nothing. But I guess it also depends on the job market, right? So I was in a privileged position to being able to wait for another year, for instance, which not everyone has, right?
Mhm.
So, beware of survivorship bias there too. But it helped me personally a lot to know exactly what I wanted out of the faculty and not apply basically like a shotgun fashion. I think that was important to me at least.
Right, saves you and other people's time.
Not only that, my own time. Like this is so time consuming, right?
Right.
And one thing that Martin Reinhardt, my postdoc advisor, asked me is when I told him about this one institution, and he asked me, "Oh, but isn't that in conflict with this other value that you have?" And I thought about it. Yes, but it's such a good institution. And then he reminded me that if that very strong value that I had is not in line with having the position there, how could I ever be happy in that position? And it sort of made me think, yeah, you're actually right. No, I think knowing what your values are and whether the faculty that you're joining aligns with these is super important.
Okay, that's great advice. So yeah, thank you for sharing all of this, Ayub.
Thank you so much for having me. That's such a fantastic series. I'm very happy that it exists, and thank you so much for all your work here.